In a lot of my videos, I use a tool called Raya Pro, which is helpful for luminosity masking. It's a plugin in Photoshop. Today, I'm going to give you a brief tutorial. I always say in these videos that this is not a Raya Pro tutorial, but today I'm going to give a brief Raya Pro tutorial on how I use it. There just happens to be an image that I'm going to use the two main functionalities that I use within Raya Pro, and I'm going to kind of go into a little bit more depth on this video on how to use that. So when we look at this image, this is a single exposure handheld. There's a few things that I know that I need to do to this. One, I need to bring back some of the highlights in here. They're kind of blown out a little bit, and I need to just make this somewhat more evenly exposed. So I've already brought down my highlights in Lightroom. This is what they looked like before I brought them down. But now I need, there's even more stuff I need to do. So I'm just going to continue to make some adjustments here. I want to bring in these details as much as possible. I think I've got them as good as I'm going to get them. Now I'm just going to create a virtual copy. Again, I didn't do multiple exposures. I know my camera's limitations. I'm using a Sony a7R4, and I believe this image was shot with a Canon tilt shift, if I'm not mistaken. So I create a virtual copy. I know that I have a lot of dynamic range within this camera. I know that I can pull the shadows up even more, and I know I can recover the highlights a little bit more. So when I shot it handheld, I shot it with that in mind. That way I don't have to shoot brackets. I don't need extra photos. I don't even need to use a tripod for that matter. I can just shoot one single exposure, and I know what my limitations are with that. So I'm going to go ahead and on the virtual copy, I'm going to increase the overall dynamic range. If you notice, this is another thing that people don't realize is that you can actually make exposure adjustments within the histogram itself. So I generally just drag the entire histogram from the middle toward where I want it. Again, this is kind of overdone. I want to make it evenly exposed though. So now I've got, from one single image, I've got two different exposures. And if you have brackets, you can do this with brackets as well, but I'm just trying to demonstrate that you don't always need brackets for whatever the situation is. So we're going to go ahead and open these as layers in Photoshop. Now again, I have two things that I need to accomplish with Raya Pro for this particular image. One, I have to recover the highlights, and two, I have to do some color cast removal, some fine tuning on that. And again, what Raya Pro is, it's luminosity masking. So let's go ahead and just dive in. Now I've got my darker layer, my main layer on the top, and I've got my overexposed layer on the bottom. And I'm going to be using this one as my main exposure. This is what I want it to essentially be, what I want it to essentially look like when we're done. But I need to first bring in, recover the highlights from this and put them on top of this. Now I could go through and add a mask and brush it all in. And I could go through and do a manual luminosity masking process, which is not what we're going to do today. Instead, we're going to use Raya Pro, which is this little plugin right here, this IM Instant Mask. Now, this is not a full Raya Pro tutorial. This is just a tutorial on how I use it and what I think is relevant for us in architectural photography. But Raya Pro in itself has a bunch of different options within it, but I only use the Instamask option, and I learned about this from Brian Berkowitz, so credit to him for this. But essentially what we've got a couple different panels here, and I'll go ahead and zoom in. You're pretty much messing, you're going to be sticking within these, for the most part within these panels here, this B, D, and M, which is brights, darks, and midtones. And I usually only stick to these ones and twos, and and I'll show these in a second. And then I also will mess with color, and I will mess with select white. So and also these sliders here. So I'm going to give you a brief rundown as to what we're dealing with here. So if I want to mask these bright white parts in because I have details in those bright white parts, so what I have to do is I have to ask myself, do I want to select the bright parts of this image, the dark parts of this image, or the midtones of this image? Okay. Once you ask yourself that, you can look over here and say, what is the intensity level I want to select of those, and like how sensitive do I want to be? So let's just go through the scale 1 through 6. So if I hit 1, you'll see what it's done is it's gone through and it's selected all of the bright parts of this image. Now, if I go to darks, it's going to go through and select all the dark parts of this image. And again, remember with masks, it's white reveals, black conceals. So whatever is black will be hidden from the mask. whatever is white will be revealed. So again, if I'm selecting all the darks, this is all the darks. So everything dark would be revealed. And if I want to do midtones, it goes through and it selects all the midtones within the image, okay? So again, for the most part, I'm generally sticking to the brights and darks, and I'm generally sticking on the 1 and the 2. But for the most part, I stick with the 1. And then I come down here to these sliders, and I mess with the midtones and highlights, because that gives me a little bit more fine tuning and control. So if I slide the midtones to the left, what should happen is it should brighten up. It should bring all of those midtones, like these strings or whatever. It should intensify those a little bit. Now, if I bring the highlights down, what'll happen is it will contract all those. It'll basically add a lot of contrast to this image. And if I keep going, it's just going to fine tune a lot of those details for me. So what I'm trying to do is get in between the strings. Now, what I'm going to do is bring the midtones up, and you can see how intense that gets. So what I'm trying to find is the perfect level of contrast that will allow me to make the color selections that I want. So we're just going to keep on messing with these sliders, and I'm pretty sure I'm where I need to be. I don't want any of this wood selected behind. I don't really care so much about this stuff because I'm only masking in this stuff over here, right? So we're going to go ahead and we're going to hit select white. And what this does is this makes a selection of all this basically creates the mask for you. So when you hit select white, it's going to go ahead and create an image mask. You're going to sometimes, and Raya Pro is a little buggy with this. Sometimes you'll see the marching ants, which are these little dots that go around. If you see those, just hit hide ants. The selection is still there, but the marching ant thing is hidden, all right? And you don't want that to be in your way so that you can see what you're doing. Now, it's hard to tell, but there is an image mask that is created here, and there's a selection made. So all I need to do is simply brush out the areas that I want to reveal on the mask. Remember, because white reveals, black conceals. And as you can see, I'm brushing over this, and it's only brushing in the selections that I made within that mask. So it's basically allowing me to recover those highlights up there. And I'm going to tone it back a little bit. I'm just trying to demonstrate really quick what we're doing here. And I can even bring these lights down a little bit, but you can kind of see it puts a little halo around there. So we're not going to do that. So anyway, that hopefully gives you a good example of how you would use this. This is kind of it's not a super extreme example, but it's a good example as to how you can use this. And this is also, you can do window pulls with this. You can do recovery on, you know, when you just need to even out an exposure. This is a good way to do that with Raya Pro. All right, so we've got our detail back. Now, this is what it looks like without bringing the mask in. This is what it looks like with. We're just going to bring the opacity down just a little bit so that it's not like overdone. And I'm actually going to hit D to bring my default black and white palette back, and I'm going to hit X to switch the palette around. And I'm going to brush out, I'm going to bring my brush down to about 50, and I'm just going to brush out some of the areas where I didn't want it to do that, just so that it's not overdone. Like, I don't need these to be all dark. It was mostly just this area up here. Just gonna brush these out. And that's good. All right, so we've got our exposure back to where we want it. Now we have to ask ourselves, how do we remove the color casts, the yellow color casts from these this paper? And I think this is made of like rice paper, I believe. But how do we remove the yellow from this easily? I could go through. Now let's just think about some of the ways we can do this. We can create an adjustment layer, and I can go to the yellows, and I can bring the saturation down on the yellows, and that works. But as you can see, it also brings the yellows out of everything else in the image. I could do that. I could do an inversion on the mask itself. I could just brush out what I want where I want it. But the problem with, and this works, there's nothing wrong with this, but the problem with this is that now I really can't get into these yellows. I really can't get into these strings without also affecting the yellow that's in the brown behind it, right? Now this will work when you're in a pinch and you need to get something done quickly. That definitely works. The other thing you can do, however, is you can use Raya Pro to remove color casts. So you're essentially creating the same exact scenario. So what we're going to do this is we're going to go to adjustment layers. We're going to go to hue and saturation. We're going to dial the saturation back. I'm going to bring it to like, I don't know. I'm pretty much just looking at these whites right here. And I don't want them to be like bright white and like desaturated completely. But right there is a pretty good spot. Like I'm okay with them having a little bit of yellow in there because I don't want to completely remove the color cast. I just want them to be reduced. So we're bringing the saturation down to 41%. I'm going to invert that mask by hitting Command I, and then I'm going to hit color in Raya Pro. And I've already done this on previous images, so I already have the color selected, but you'll see the color picker pops up in your eyedropper tool. So you're pretty much just going to go and you're going to find where the color is that you want to be removed. I think this is a good sample of it right there. And we'll hit OK. And you can see all of that particular color within the scene is selected. And if you get a little closer, you can see that it even goes through and it's very detailed on that it selects the whites. It separates the white strings from the background as well. This is why I use Raya Pro, because it's a lot more detailed and you can get a lot more granular in your mask creation with this. And of course I can go through and I can fine tune with the sliders again. And that's what we're going to do. I want to get as much contrast as possible so that I'm for certain not getting the colors from the brown wall removed at all. And we're just going to keep on dragging this slider a little bit. That should be good. It's a pretty contrasty image. We're going to go ahead and select white. And again, the hide ants or the ants didn't pop up because, again, Raya Pro, it's hit or miss with that. Sometimes they pop up, sometimes they don't. So I don't have to hit mask. But rest assured, the mask is there. Now I can just start brushing out where I don't want that yellow to be. Bring in the strings here. Now imagine if you had a blue color cast on a wall, which I have some blue down here. We can do the same thing with Raya Pro with that. But this is a really good way to fine tune the color cast removal when you're working within an image. So we're just going to continue to brush this out. And I'm usually not a stickler for color cast removal. Like I'll remove it if it's obnoxious or if it's distracting. But I'm not a firm believer that color cast needs to be removed on every single image. Like I'm keeping some of it on these walls because that's just the way it looks like, or that's just the way it looks. But if it becomes a distraction, like the artist specifically requested that we reduce the yellow color cast on the paper itself because that was an issue between them and the airport. They were supposed to have cooler lights apparently, and they didn't. I don't know, maybe I misunderstood. But either way, we're gonna just kind of remove the color cast. And you know, some of the selection was made up here too. I can remove some of the yellow out of this stuff. I can remove some of the yellow out of this if I want to. And you can kind of see there's also a little bit of a blue color cast happening over here. That's because behind the camera there are some massive LEDs, or either LED or LCD screens, and was creating a color cast that would frankly change very often. So we've got all that done. So we're gonna go ahead and hit Command D to deselect the mask because I don't want the mask to be selected anymore. But here you go. This is what it looks like before and after. It's very subtle. But as you can see, the brown behind the strings was not affected at all. It was just the things that I specifically selected using Raya Pro that were affected. So if you want to find out if there's any more color casts that are, maybe your eyes aren't quite adjusting to the image. I mean, this blue is kind of distracting and it makes everything else seem like it's blue. But what we're going to do is we're going to actually come and do another adjustment layer. And one thing you can do to find out where your color casts are is you can just bring the saturation all the way up on a color cast layer, and you can see for yourself where things are prominent. So I still obviously have some yellow in here. That's totally fine. There's red and yellow in this. There's magenta up here. I've got some magenta on the edges of these walls, and I've got blue color casts here. Again, this is kind of as I originally noticed. Like there's a little bit of blue, but it's not obnoxious, right? So I could go through and I could use Raya Pro, or I could simply just go to the blue saturation channel or whatever this is, and just bring the blue channel down a little bit. And I remember where those blue things were at, so I can just invert the hue and saturation layer, and I can just brush out where I don't want the blue to be. Like I want the blue to be on this sign still because it belongs there, but I don't want it to be down here necessarily, and I kind of want to reduce the blue that's in here a little bit. Again, it's not a huge deal. I'll reduce it from the steps a little bit. But if I'm in here and I have the tools, I might as well do it. But my point is you don't need to use Raya Pro every single time you want to use color cast. There's more simple ways to do it. But if you need to get very fine-tuned color cast removal, or you need to do some very fine-tuned luminosity masking, Raya Pro is a great tool to use. There's also Lumenzia. I have Lumenzia as well, but I found Raya Pro, personally, I just enjoyed it more, and I can't really pinpoint why. It's been a while since I've used Lumenzia, but I have both, and they're great plugins to help you speed up your masking workflow. And as you can see, you get pretty easy results in a relatively short period of time. So hopefully you found this helpful. I'm not sponsored by Raya Pro or everything, but I did put a little link to the Raya Pro in the description. There's no kickback or anything. This is just if you want to go check it out, whatever. But in the meantime, thanks for watching. Let me know if you have any questions that I might be able to answer or make a more in-depth tutorial on.